You're watching Northern Crimes.
Eastern Washington is a place of striking beauty. Vast open plains, rolling hills, and quiet small towns scattered across the landscape. But behind the tranquility of this less populated region lies a darker side, where a series of chilling mysteries remain unsolved. In this oftentimes overlooked part of the state, where the distances between towns stretch for miles, disappearances and murders can go unnoticed for years, sometimes decades. It's a place where secrets can remain buried, yet each of these cases is a puzzle, and in the end, someone holds a key. This is the true story of 5 cold cases from Eastern Washington, and this is Northern Crimes. On a warm spring afternoon in 1979, 12-year-old Christina White made a phone call to her mother, feeling unwell after a day at the Asotin County Fair. What seemed like an ordinary moment quickly turned into a nightmare. Christina vanished without a trace, sparking one of Washington's most enduring and unsettling cold cases. Christina White was just a typical 12-year-old girl living in Asotin, Washington, a small town just 5 miles from Clarkston. She was known as a bright and happy child, always spending time with her friends. On April 28, 1979, during the Asotin County Fair, Christina mysteriously disappeared, leaving her family in the town searching for answers that, unfortunately, would never come. On the day she disappeared, Christina had gone to watch a parade and later went to a friend's house to help with their horse. After becoming overheated in the hot sun, she called her mother to let her know she wasn't feeling well. Her mother, Betty Eminger, told her to rest for a bit and then meet her at a nearby street corner. But Christina never made it to that corner. In fact, no one has seen her since. She was riding a 10-speed bicycle and wearing a tan and pink striped shirt, blue jeans, and red tennis shoes. Her bike, like Christina, was never found, leaving investigators with nothing to go on. Despite an intense investigation, no solid leads ever emerged. The only clue came a year later, when some of Christina's school papers were discovered near a horse pasture rented by her friend's mother. The papers were found in pristine condition, raising even more questions about how they ended up there. Patricia Brennan, the mother of Christina's friend, and her boyfriend, Lance Jeffrey Voss, were linked to the house Christina was last seen at, but no charges were ever filed. Voss remains a person of interest in this case, though no direct evidence has been found to implicate him. After 45 years, the disappearance of Christina White remains unsolved. Detectives like Jackie Nichols of the Asotin County Sheriff's Office continue to work on the case, and new advances in forensic technology offer a glimmer of hope. But until more evidence or a witness comes forward, the case stays cold, and Christina's family is left in the dark. In the summer of 1984, 2 fishermen along the Spokane River stumbled upon a gruesome scene that would haunt investigators for nearly 4 decades. A decapitated body with its hands and feet missing lay discarded on the riverbank, leaving behind a chilling mystery that would remain unsolved for years. The body, found on June 20, 1984, belonged to a young woman. With no way to identify her and no missing persons reports matching her description, she was dubbed, quote, Millie, by investigators. It wasn't until 2023 that her true identity was revealed as Ruth Bell Waymeyer. She was born in 1960 and was a Spokane native who'd lived something of a nomadic lifestyle. Ruth's body was discovered by the fishermen, but at the time there were no immediate clues to her identity. The case went cold for over 2 decades. Then, in 1998, a woman walking her dog found a skull in Spokane, Washington, in a vacant lot on 7th Avenue and Sherman Street. Forensic testing confirmed that the skull belonged to the body discovered 14 years earlier. Ruth had drifted between Spokane and Wenatchee, Washington, and had never been reported missing, making her case all the more baffling. Despite a facial reconstruction and public appeals for information, investigators couldn't identify Ruth until around 2021. Spokane police worked with Othram, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. They analyzed DNA samples taken from Ruth's remains. In 2023, a DNA match connected Ruth to living family members, including her sister. This discovery finally revealed her identity as Ruth Bell Waymeyer. Ruth had been married twice, and at the time of her death, was married to a man named Trampus Vaughn, a man with a criminal history and ties to Washington and Iowa. While Ruth's identity has now been uncovered, her killer remains unknown. Her second husband, Trampus Vaughn, died in 2017. That said, he's never been ruled out as a suspect. Spokane police are continuing their investigation, hoping to find more clues, including the whereabouts of Ruth's child, who was born just before her death. In April 2010, Rachel Anderson, a devoted mother of 4, vanished after enduring months of relentless stalking and harassment. Though her body has never been found, her estranged husband was ultimately convicted of her murder, marking the beginning of a tragic and unresolved mystery. Rachel Anderson was a 40-year-old woman from Clarkston, Washington, known for her devotion to her family and community. As a mother, grandmother, and sister, she was well loved by everyone around her. But in early 2010, her life took a terrifying turn when she became the target of a stalker, later revealed to be her estranged husband, Charles Capone. On April 16, 2010, Rachel disappeared after last being seen at Capone's auto repair shop in Moscow, Idaho. In the months leading up to her disappearance, she'd been harassed by threatening phone calls, vandalism, and strange occurrences around her property. Rachel had filed multiple police reports about the stalking because she feared for her life. The last call she made was to a friend, saying she needed to discuss something very important. But she was never heard from again. The investigation quickly focused on Capone, who had a history of violence and threats against Rachel. According to testimony, Capone's accomplice, David Stone, witnessed Capone strangle Rachel to death outside his shop. Stone admitted to helping Capone dispose of her body, wrapping it in a tarp and chains, before dumping it into the Snake River from the Red Wolf Crossing Bridge. Despite extensive searches, Rachel's body was never found, though forensic evidence linked Capone to the crime. In 2014, Charles Capone was convicted of first-degree murder along with conspiracy charges, despite Rachel's body never being recovered. Stone's cooperation helped prosecutors secure the conviction. Capone was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite this resolution, the exact location of Rachel's body remains unknown. On a cold November night in 2015, Deanne Hastings, a mother of 3 and beauty school student, left a note for her fiancé saying she was running a quick errand. What should have been a routine trip turned into a chilling mystery when Deanne vanished without a trace. Deanne Hastings was 35 years old, a mother, a beauty school student, and engaged to be married. Despite her struggles with bipolar disorder, Deanne was described as a vibrant and compassionate person, always dedicated to her family. She'd been working to build a new life when she suddenly disappeared from Spokane, Washington, leaving behind unanswered questions and heartbreak for her loved ones. On the night of November 3, 2015, Deanne left a note for her fiancé, Mike Tibbetts, saying she had a great day and was going to the store. She never returned. The following day, her car was found parked downtown with her purse, phone, and wallet inside, but her credit cards were missing. Surveillance footage later showed Deanne acting erratically at a local grocery store where she purchased bizarre items including a bottle of vodka. Witnesses said she seemed confused and had mentioned being drugged and kidnapped. But despite these alarming signs, no one intervened. Another witness later stated seeing her with 2 unidentified men. The investigation revealed a strange series of events. A grocery store clerk claimed to have spent the night with Deanne. Another man, Randy Riley, was found using her credit cards, but he denied involvement in her disappearance. Although he was later charged with theft, police never pinned him for anything else. Authorities also questioned her fiancé, Mike Tibbetts, following up on inconsistencies in his behavior. However, he was later cleared. Deanne's family remained frustrated by the lack of progress in the case, and despite several searches and leads, no concrete evidence ever turned up. Deanne had a history of mental health episodes, but this time was different. She left behind everything, including her children, something her family says she would have never done voluntarily. Almost a decade later, Deanne Hastings' disappearance remains a cold case. Her fiancé and family continue to search for answers, but no trace of her has been found. Randy Riley, the man who was found with Deanne's credit cards, was sentenced to 13 months in prison in 2016. The grocery store clerk who said he'd spent the night with Deanne later moved to Florida. Although this raised suspicions, police haven't linked him definitively to her disappearance. In the end, Deanne's family believes someone out there knows what happened, and they continue to hold out hope for answers. In 2018, 27-year-old Courtney Holden vanished from her Spokane home under disturbing circumstances. Her disappearance happened after years of alleged abuse and isolation at the hands of her adoptive family. For over a year, no one even knew she was missing, and when the truth finally surfaced, her family was arrested, but not for her disappearance. The question remains, what really happened to Courtney Holden? Courtney Holden, a 27-year-old mother from Spokane, Washington, was described by those who knew her as a loving, devoted parent who would never abandon her young son. Raised in a troubled household, Courtney's life was marred by alleged abuse from her adoptive mother, Judy Holden, and her brother, Joshua Holden, who treated her more like a servant than a family member. Courtney was last seen in the summer of 2018, trying to escape her family's home with a duffel bag, only to be dragged back inside by her adoptive brother. She was never seen again. It wasn't until October 2019, over a year later, that her disappearance was officially reported. Her adoptive family claimed that she'd run away with a boyfriend, but suspicious behavior, including the use of Courtney's credit cards after her disappearance, pointed to something far more sinister. When police finally began investigating in late 2019, they found a pattern of control and abuse in Courtney's household. Neighbors reported seeing bruises on her, and it became clear that she was not allowed to leave the house freely. Joshua Holden's criminal record and erratic behavior raised more concerns, as did the fact that both Joshua and Judy fled to Texas with Courtney's son shortly after her disappearance. While they were arrested for identity theft and custodial interference, no charges have been filed directly related to Courtney's disappearance. Today, Courtney Holden's case remains unsolved. Police suspect foul play and believe Courtney is likely deceased, but without solid evidence, her case remains classified as a missing person investigation. Her adoptive family has been released from custody, and detectives continue to plead for anyone with information to come forward. Beneath eastern Washington's serene landscapes, unsettling mysteries continue to remain unsolved. In a region where time stretches on and answers seem lost in the vast landscape, these cases continue to haunt the families and communities left behind. Each one represents a life unfinished, a story with missing pieces, and a truth that someone, somewhere, still holds. Could the key to these cold cases lie hidden in plain sight? Or will they remain buried forever in the quiet corners of this remote region? Until the answers come to light, Eastern Washington's cold cases remain a chilling reminder that some mysteries refuse to rest. Washington State. It's a region known for its breathtaking landscapes and pioneering spirit. But beneath the surface of its natural beauty lies a much darker history. Over the decades, this corner of the Pacific Northwest has been home to crimes that have left communities shaken and questions unanswered. From cases steeped in greed and obsession to those marked by ingenuity and desperation. Each one reveals a stark duality, the clash between humanity's brightest and darkest instincts. This is the true story of 5 notorious crimes from Washington State, and this is Northern Crimes. Seattle, 2019. A city evolving with innovation and a thriving tech sector. But amidst the digital boom, a sinister case of cyberstalking emerged. An anonymous person targeted a young woman, sending relentless threats that soon extended to her loved ones. What began as a personal vendetta grew into a calculated campaign of fear. This is the story of the Seattle cyberstalker, a chilling intersection of obsession and technology in the digital age. Sumit Garg, a privacy consultant, appeared outwardly successful, but his private life revealed a darker side. In early 2019, he shared an apartment in Seattle's Belltown neighborhood with his wife and a young woman who would later become known as, quote, Victim 1. Their ordinary arrangement quickly turned hostile as Garg's behavior escalated. Verbal abuse, controlling outbursts, and explicit advances created an unsettling environment, to say the least. By June 2019, a physical confrontation forced Victim 1 to move out, She filed for a domestic violence protection order, but instead of stopping, Garg intensified his efforts. Days after the separation, he applied for a job at her workplace, a move that was disturbingly calculated. Denied employment, Garg weaponized his technological expertise, launching a campaign of harassment that left her in constant fear. Over the next month, cryptic messages referencing personal details of her life flooded Victim 1's inbox. The harassment escalated, with violent threats accompanied by photographs of her apartment lobby. Each message came from anonymized accounts, ensuring that she never felt safe. So, with options running out, Victim 1 turned to the Seattle police. Detectives analyzed the email's metadata and uncovered a pattern pointing to a single perpetrator. A breakthrough finally came when surveillance footage captured Garg entering Victim 1's building at the exact time one of the threatening emails was sent. This visual evidence connected him directly to the crimes. Garg's wife, initially supportive of him, eventually became a key witness. Under questioning, she revealed that Garg had instructed her to destroy evidence, including clothing linked to the surveillance footage. She also provided messages and documents tying him to the cyber-stalking accounts. Federal authorities, including the United States Secret Service, joined the investigation. Their digital forensics uncovered Garg's elaborate operation. Dozens of fake email accounts used to send thousands of harassing messages over 2 years. The scale of his coordination was staggering, underscoring his calculated efforts to evade detection. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming case against Garg, emphasizing the psychological toll on Victim 1. She testified about the unrelenting fear that consumed her life, stating,
"I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went."
Evidence, including surveillance footage, digital records, and testimony from Garg's wife, left no doubt about his guilt. In July 2024, Garg was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison after being convicted on charges of conspiracy to engage in cyberstalking and violating protection orders. The judge called his actions, quote, deliberate, malicious, and devastating. Tacoma, Washington, May 24th, 1935. A typical spring afternoon turned to panic as 9-year-old George Weyerhaeuser vanished on his way home from school. George, heir to one of America's wealthiest lumber dynasties, disappeared without a trace. That evening, the Weyerhaeuser family received a ransom note demanding $200,000 in unmarked bills. The message was clear: deliver the money within 5 days or face unimaginable consequences. The family was thrust into a high-stakes game of survival where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. But who were the culprits behind this brazen crime, and how far would they go to get what they wanted? The Weyerhaeuser family's wealth made them a prime target in the turbulent era of the Great Depression. George, an ordinary boy by all appearances, had no way of knowing that the short walk from school to home would thrust him into national headlines. His kidnappers were a pair of desperate men, Harmon Whaley and William Daynard, both hardened by lives of crime and time spent in the Idaho State Penitentiary. They, along with Whaley's wife Margaret, devised a meticulous plan to abduct the young heir and extort his family. The ransom note delivered to the Weyerhaeuser home was as chilling as it was direct. Instructions for delivering the money, coded messages to be exchanged in the personal ads of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and a warning not to involve the police. Over the next 5 days, the family followed the cryptic orders, each step more unnerving than the last. The ransom exchange was orchestrated with a precision that bordered on theatrical. On May 29th, George's father was directed to drive along Highway 99 to a desolate spot, leave the ransom money in the car, and walk away without looking back. Moments later, George was freed unharmed, a miraculous end to the family's nightmare, but the kidnappers' escape wouldn't last. The FBI and local law enforcement quickly mobilized, tracing the ransom money using serial numbers meticulously recorded before the exchange. As the marked bill surfaced across the country, the net tightened. Investigators tracked Whaley and Daynard through their careless spending, uncovering their trail piece by piece. The pivotal break came when Margaret Whaley, under pressure, confessed to her involvement and provided critical details about her accomplices. The FBI's methodical work led to the capture of Herman Whaley and William Daynard, both of whom were found in possession of evidence tying them to the kidnapping. The three conspirators faced swift justice. Herman Whaley and William Daynard were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, while Margaret Whaley received a lesser sentence for her cooperation. Together, they were held accountable for a crime that had gripped the nation. As for George, the ordeal left a mark, but he grew to lead a life of resilience, eventually becoming the chairman of the Weyerhaeuser Company Board. The Weyerhaeuser kidnapping underscores how desperation and greed can lead to the unthinkable. It also raises a haunting question. In a world driven by power and wealth, how do we protect the most vulnerable among us? Renton, Washington, 1969. A quiet city shaken by a string of shocking crimes. Over 2 years, 4 young lives were lost in a series of attacks that left the community in gripping fear. At the center of it all was a young man whose actions defied comprehension, leading investigators on a harrowing journey to uncover the truth. This is the story of Gary Gene Grant, one of the Pacific Northwest's most chilling cases. Gary Gene Grant grew up in Renton, Washington in the 1950s and 60s. His upbringing was challenging, marked by economic hardship and family struggles. By his teenage years, he dropped out of school, isolated and grappling with emotional and mental health challenges. After a short and troubled stint in the military, Grant returned home, where his behavior took a disturbing turn. In December 1969, 19-year-old Carol Adele Erickson disappeared while walking home. Her death would be the first in a series of incidents that left residents reeling. Then, in September 1970, 17-year-old Joanne Mary Zuloff was tragically killed in an accident that bore striking similarities. Investigators noted troubling patterns, but struggled to piece together the puzzle. Then, in April 1971, the case took an even darker turn when 2 young boys, Scott Andrews and Bradley Lyons, went missing. Their disappearance heightened fears, and when their bodies were discovered, the need to find answers became urgent. The case broke wide open when a blood-stained hunting knife was found near the scene of the boys' disappearance. Investigators traced the knife through several owners, eventually leading them to Gary Gene Grant. Under questioning, Grant initially claimed memory lapses, but later provided information about the crimes. His arrest brought relief to a community that was desperate for justice. The evidence against him, including shoe prints, a weapon, and his own admissions, was overwhelming. Investigators worked carefully to ensure a solid case while navigating legal challenges over how some evidence had been obtained. Grant's trial began in August 1971. Prosecutors presented detailed evidence, including physical items and testimony linking him to the crimes. Although his defense team argued that he wasn't mentally fit, a forensic evaluation determined that Grant was capable of standing trial. On August 25, 1971, Gary Gene Grant was convicted of multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The outcome provided closure to families in a grieving community, but left lingering questions about the events that led up to the crimes. The Renton murders underscore the stark duality of human nature, the capacity for unimaginable violence, alongside the resilience of a community united in a pursuit of justice. Decades later, Gary Grant's crimes remain a haunting chapter in Renton's history, reminding us of the delicate balance between good and evil and the need for vigilance in the face of darkness. Seattle, July 7th, 1993. An electric night in a city pulsating with the grunge music revolution. Amidst the vibrant energy of the punk scene, tragedy struck. Mia Zapata, lead singer of the Gits, a rising force in Seattle's punk movement, was brutally murdered. The discovery of her body on a quiet Central District street sent shockwaves through the community. Who could commit such a heinous act against someone beloved by so many? This is the story of Mia Zapata's murder, a crime that haunted Seattle for decades before justice was served. Mia Zapata was no ordinary artist. Known for her passionate voice and magnetic stage presence, she was the heart and soul of the Gits. Their energetic performances and raw lyrics captured the spirit of Seattle's punk scene. Fresh off a successful West Coast tour, the band seemed poised for stardom, but that dream came to an abrupt and very violent end. After a night out with friends, Zapata decided to walk home, and somewhere along the way, she was attacked. The details were horrifying. She was beaten, raped, and strangled to death with the drawstrings of her hoodie. Her body was left on the street, a stark and tragic contrast to the vibrant life she'd led. The murder devastated her friends and fans, sparking an outpouring of grief and anger. Yet, despite efforts to find her killer, including benefits and fundraisers led by Joan Jett and Kurt Cobain to hire private investigators, the case went cold. For nearly a decade, Mia Zapata's murder was a painful mystery. Then, in 2003, a breakthrough came in the form of DNA technology. Saliva that had been collected from her body was analyzed and matched to Jesus Mezquia, a Cuban immigrant living in Florida who had no known connection to Zapata or Seattle's music scene. Investigators pieced together a chilling portrait of Mezquia, a man with a serious history of violence against women. The randomness of the crime was as shocking as its brutality. Zapata had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Mezquia had taken advantage of that moment to commit an unthinkable act. Mezquia was arrested and extradited to Seattle. In 2004, he stood trial for Mia Zapata's murder. The evidence was overwhelming, with DNA tying him directly to the crime. The trial revealed the senseless cruelty of the act, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Mezquia was convicted and sentenced to 36 years in prison. For the friends and family of Mia Zapata, the conviction brought some closure, but the void left by her death could never be filled. Mia Zapata's murder remains a haunting reminder of how quickly violence can shatter even the most vibrant lives. Her death galvanized a movement, inspiring the creation of Home Alive, an organization dedicated to teaching self-defense and combating violence. But questions still linger. How many other crimes remain unsolved, and how can we ensure safety in a world where darkness often strikes at random? Mia's legacy endures, both as an artist whose voice will never fade and as a symbol of resilience against violence. Camino Island, Washington, 2008. A peaceful, wooded retreat in the Pacific Northwest became the unlikely setting for a daring and chaotic crime spree. Colton Harris Moore, a 17-year-old with a troubled past, was on the run. Known as the, quote, barefoot bandit, he left a trail of stolen planes, cars, and boats across multiple states, often leaving behind his signature, bare footprints. How the heck did a teenager outwit law enforcement for over 2 years and capture the world's attention? This is the story of a fugitive whose exploits blurred the line between folk hero and criminal. Born in 1991, Colton Harris Moore's childhood was marked by poverty, neglect, and a volatile home life. Growing up on Camano Island, he spent his youth exploring the woods, dreaming of escape, and learning to survive on his own. By the age of 12, he had his first felony conviction. By 15, he was a runaway. Harris Moore's crimes started small, burglarizing vacation homes for food and supplies, but they escalated into something far more audacious. He taught himself to hotwire cars and later, remarkably, to fly planes by reading manuals and watching online tutorials. Over 2 years, he stole 3 aircraft, several boats, and numerous cars, leaving law enforcement scrambling to keep up. His nickname, the Barefoot Bandit, came from the footprints he left at some of his crime scenes. Harris Moore became a fugitive, evading local police, the FBI, and even Homeland Security. As his escapades grew bolder, his legend spread, and he garnered a following online, with some hailing him as a modern-day outlaw. Tracking Colton Harris Moore proved challenging. He was a skilled survivalist, disappearing into the dense Pacific Northwest wilderness when authorities closed in. His crimes spanned several states and even crossed into Canada, where he allegedly stole a plane and crash-landed it in a field. In July 2010, Harris Moore upped the stakes by flying a stolen plane to the Bahamas. His daring escape ended after a week-long manhunt on the islands. Bahamian authorities captured him after he crash-landed the plane and attempted to flee by boat. Extradited to the U.S., Harris Moore faced a litany of charges, including theft, burglary, and unauthorized flight. In December 2011, he was sentenced to over 7 years in state prison, with an additional 6.5 years for federal crimes to be served concurrently. During his sentencing, Harris Moore expressed remorse for his actions and acknowledged the pain that he'd caused his victims. The judge described his case as both a tragedy and a testament to human resilience, noting his intelligence and resourcefulness despite a troubling upbringing. Colton Harris Moore's story is both extraordinary and unsettling. How did a teenager fueled by desperation and ingenuity outwit law enforcement for so long? And what does his journey say about the allure of rebellion and the vulnerabilities of the systems that are meant to stop it? Washington State's history is marked by tales of ingenuity, resilience, and community, but beneath the beauty of its landscapes lie stories of darkness and mystery. From the chilling manipulations of a cyberstalker to the desperate crimes of a runaway turned folk hero, these cases reveal the fragile boundaries between safety and chaos. Every story serves as a stark reminder that technology can be weaponized, greed can turn violent, and even the brightest lives can be extinguished in an instant. As these stories echo through the years, we're left to wonder, what other secrets linger in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest? Vancouver, Washington, November 1995. A cold autumn wind sweeps through the parking lot of Omar's Steakhouse and Lounge as a woman stumbles through the exit doors. She's visibly intoxicated, barely able to stand without assistance. A man guides her across the asphalt, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist. Witnesses later recall how she appeared, quote, almost limp, as they disappeared into the darkness. The woman was 34-year-old Carolyn Killaby, a respected medical technician and devoted mother. By morning, her car would remain abandoned in the same parking lot, but Carolyn would never be seen again. What began as a night to clear her head after an argument with her husband would spiral into one of Washington State's most disturbing murder cases. It would expose a predator hiding in plain sight, reveal shocking failures in the parole system, and ultimately lead investigators on a nationwide manhunt for a killer who refused to reveal his final secret. This is the true story of the murder of Carolyn Killaby, and this is Northern Crimes. In the fall of 1995, Carolyn Ruth Killaby seemed to have built the life she'd always wanted. At 34, she was the lead health technician at the Portland Military Induction Center, a position she'd held for nearly a decade. Colleagues described her as organized, responsible, and unfailingly reliable. Born in October 1961, Carolyn had spent most of her life in Oregon before moving just across the state line to Vancouver, Washington. In 1990, she married Dan Killaby, blending their families, each bringing a daughter from previous relationships. To those who knew them, they appeared to be the perfect couple, often described as like newlyweds, even years into their marriage. But beneath this picture of domestic harmony, cracks had begun to form. According to friends, Carolyn had recently discussed the possibility of divorce, though she wasn't ready to separate just yet. She was actively working to improve their relationship, hoping to recapture what they once had. On Saturday, November 11th, 1995, the couple planned a romantic evening at home. Both daughters would be away, giving Dan and Carolyn time to reconnect after days of bickering. But when Dan's brother invited him out for drinks after work, their plans began to unravel. Dan decided to stop for just one drink before heading home, but one drink became several, and as the night wore on, he realized he was too intoxicated to drive. Around 1 a.m., Dan called home and left a message on their answering machine, explaining that he'd be staying at his brother's house for the night. The message went unheard. By then, Carolyn had already made a fateful decision of her own. Hurt and disappointed by her husband's absence, Carolyn refused to spend the night alone at home. Instead, she drove to Omar's Steakhouse and Lounge, just 10 minutes from their house. It wasn't her first visit to the establishment, which had earned the unfortunate nickname Snowmars due to its reputation for drug deals. Multiple witnesses later described seeing Carolyn that night, dancing, drinking heavily, and at times appearing to have been crying. The bartender reported serving her 4 scotches with beer chasers. At 5'6" tall and just 110 pounds, alcohol hit Carolyn hard. Adding to her vulnerability, she was also taking Vicodin for chronic pain from a previous car accident. As the night progressed, Carolyn became increasingly intoxicated. Witnesses described her with her head hung over, eventually becoming too drunk to be able to walk on her own. Throughout the evening, a regular customer named Dennis had been watching her, even commenting to the bouncer that she would meet with, quote, trouble before the night was out. Around 11:30 p.m., Dennis approached the barely conscious Carolyn and helped her toward the exit. She was so impaired that she left her purse behind. When the bouncer brought it out to the parking lot, he observed that Carolyn still needed help walking and appeared drunk and limp. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Carolyn Killaby. The next morning, Dan returned home to find both Carolyn and her car missing. Initially, he assumed she was angry and staying with friends or family. But when evening came with no word from her, concern began to grow. Carolyn was always responsible about staying in touch, especially when it came to her job and her daughters. When Monday morning arrived and Carolyn failed to report for her 6 a.m. shift, Dan and his brother began searching Vancouver. They eventually found her 1991 Toyota Camry still parked at Omar's. The car showed no signs of forced entry, and a handwritten note inside initially raised questions about whether she'd flown to Los Angeles. The lead quickly evaporated when investigators determined the note was unrelated to her disappearance. It was from a week earlier when she'd given her daughter's friend a ride to the airport. As police began investigating, they learned from Omar's employees about Dennis Smith, the man who'd escorted Carolyn from the bar. At 33, Smith was a regular at Omar's, and detectives were eager to speak with him as the last person known to have seen Carolyn alive. When questioned, Smith offered a bizarre explanation. He claimed that after helping Carolyn to the car, they were confronted by a stranger wielding a club. According to Smith, this unknown assailant struck him, yelled obscenities at Carolyn, then dragged her away. Rather than intervening or calling police, Smith said he simply got in his truck and left. The story immediately raised red flags for investigators, and as they dug deeper into Dennis Smith's background, those concerns only intensified. Just before midnight on the night Carolyn disappeared, 2 separate 911 calls reported hearing a woman's screams for help coming from a field near Five Corners, an area just north of Omar's. Police responded but found nothing. Hours later, around 1:30 a.m., witnesses at a nearby 7-Eleven saw Dennis Smith with blood smeared on his white dress shirt and his hand wrapped in a bloody rag. When asked, Smith explained he'd been in a fight at a bar. Following day, Smith attended a Sunday dinner at Omar's, hosted by regular customers. He appeared nervous and agitated. He told the bouncer, quote, "I told you, that woman was going to be trouble." To another acquaintance, he mentioned having sex with Carolyn and repeated his story about a stranger attacking them in the parking lot. When Smith learned that police were looking for Carolyn, his behavior became even more suspicious. The interior of his truck was damaged by fire, which Smith attributed to a dropped cigarette. But when police briefly inspected the vehicle on November 15th, they observed a large burn hole in the bench seat that seemed inconsistent with his explanation. After this police contact, Smith drastically altered his truck. He removed the carpet and upholstery and thoroughly cleaned the vehicle with household chemicals. He asked a friend if she thought Lysol and Pine Sol would, quote, ruin DNA. Another friend saw him at a gas station and noted that all the interior carpet was gone. Smith asked if he could wash his truck at her parents' home because, quote, he didn't want the police to know he'd been off-road with the truck. When Smith finally turned his truck over to investigators, forensic technicians found blood on the steering wheel and door handle. They also recovered Smith's watch, which tested positive for blood. Chemical analysis of the seat burn indicated an accelerant had been used, not a cigarette as Smith had claimed. As investigators built their case against Dennis Smith, they discovered something even more disturbing. This wasn't his first murder. In 1982, Smith had killed his own sister, 29-year-old Patricia Johnson. Her body was found near Salmon Creek in Vancouver, and Smith eventually confessed to strangling her during an argument. Initially charged with first-degree murder, he accepted a plea deal for second-degree murder and served just 10 years before being paroled in June 1993. This revelation came to light in an unexpected way. Dustin Johnson, Patricia's son and Smith's nephew, had read a newspaper article about Carolyn's disappearance that mentioned a man named Dennis as the last person to see her. Suspecting this might be his uncle, Dustin contacted Dan Killaby to warn him about Smith's violent past. When confronted with this information, investigators changed their approach to Smith's questioning. His story shifted again, now claiming he and Carolyn had consensual sex in his truck for 45 minutes before a man broke in, threatened them, and dragged Carolyn away by her hair. When shown a photo lineup, Smith identified Dan Killaby as his alleged attacker. The inconsistencies in Smith's account, combined with the physical evidence and his criminal history, convinced investigators that they had their man. But Dennis Smith wasn't going to stick around to face justice. By late November, detectives were closing in. When Smith arrived for a routine check-in with his parole officer, he noticed two homicide detectives waiting. In that moment, he made a decision. He bolted. Smith vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions and fear. With no trace of where he'd gone, investigators feared the worst. Was he planning another attack? And would he disappear forever? For the next 14 months, Smith remained a fugitive. In July 1996, DNA testing confirmed that blood found in Smith's truck and on his watch matched Carolyn's mitochondrial DNA profile, a relatively new technology at the time. This evidence, combined with witness statements and Smith's suspicious behavior, led to a murder warrant being issued. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On January 31st, 1997, the television show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on Carolyn's murder featuring Smith's photo. That same night in Florida, a man calling himself David Sanborn watched the program with friends. When Smith's picture appeared, his friends joked about the resemblance. Sanborn became agitated and later borrowed their car, never to return it. When the friends reported the car stolen, police spotted it on February 4th in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. When officers approached, Smith fled on foot. After a violent struggle during which Smith attempted to grab an officer's gun, he was shot in the neck. Fingerprints confirmed his identity, and Dennis Smith was finally in custody. In May 1998, Dennis Smith stood trial for the murder of Carolyn Killaby. Prosecutors offered a deal. If Smith would reveal the location of Carolyn's body, they would allow him to plead to second-degree murder. Smith refused, and the charges were upgraded to aggravated first-degree murder. The trial marked the first use of mitochondrial DNA evidence in Washington state. After just 3.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Smith guilty on both aggravated first-degree murder and first-degree murder. He received an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. In a separate hearing, the parole board revoked Smith's parole for Patricia Johnson's murder, adding 99 years to his sentence. The board made it clear they wanted the sentence long enough that even if his murder conviction was overturned, Smith would never walk free again. Their caution proved prescient. In 2001, an appellate court overturned the aggravated murder conviction, ruling there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove the aggravating factor of rape without Carolyn's body. At resentencing, Smith received 70 years for first-degree murder, still ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The Killaby family also pursued civil action against the Washington Department of Corrections, arguing that Smith's inadequate supervision allowed him to kill again. The lawsuit revealed shocking failures in the parole system. Despite being classified as someone who, quote, cannot, under any circumstances, consume alcohol or drugs without posing a public safety risk, Smith's drug testing was discontinued after just 6 months of negative results. When Smith's wife reported concerns about his behavior, her warnings were ignored. He was allowed to live with his parents, violating a no-contact order with his nephew. For months at a time, Smith went completely unsupervised, and when he did test positive for methamphetamine, he served just 60 days instead of the 1 to 3 years his parole officer recommended. In April 2002, hours before the civil trial was to begin, the state agreed to pay the Killaby family $2.8 million. But money couldn't give them what they truly wanted: the location of Carolyn's remains. Over the years, Smith occasionally hinted at revealing where he'd hidden Carolyn's body. He once claimed he left her alongside a logging road on Larch Mountain, but searches of the area found nothing. Another time, he offered the information in exchange for Taco Bell burritos and $10,000 in cash. On November 17, 2004, Dennis Smith took his own life in prison, hanging himself with a bedsheet attached to an air vent. He was 42 years old. With his death, the hope of finding Carolyn's remains dimmed considerably. Today, nearly 3 decades after her disappearance, Carolyn Killaby's body has never been found. Her family was forced to hold a memorial service without her remains, purchasing a plot and headstone in the hope that someday she might be brought home. For Carolyn's family, the pain of her loss was compounded by the cruelty of never knowing where her remains lie. Her memorial marker at Lincoln Memorial Park in Portland stands as a testament to a life cut tragically short, a responsible and honored medical technician, a loving mother and wife, remembered by her family and friends as vibrant and fun-loving. The investigation into Carolyn's murder also forged unexpected bonds. Dustin Johnson, the nephew of her killer, became close to Carolyn's family in the aftermath of her disappearance. Carolyn's mother came to see him as another grandchild, not as the nephew of her daughter's murderer, but as the son of another of Dennis Smith's victims. While active searches for Carolyn's remains have slowed since Smith's death, there remains hope that someday she may be found and properly laid to rest. For those who knew and loved her, the mystery of her final resting place is a wound that has never fully healed. If you have information about the location of Carolyn Killaby's remains, please contact the Vancouver Police Tip Line at 360-487-7399. On a cold January evening in 1970, a 17-year-old girl walked alone across a hospital parking lot in Olympia, Washington. The yellow interior light of her station wagon flickered on, and moments later, Patricia Garrison collapsed beside it, bleeding from nearly 20 stab wounds. A hospital employee found her barely conscious. Before slipping into shock, Patricia uttered a few cryptic words. She suggested she wasn't supposed to say who had driven her there. She held on for 32 hours before succumbing to her injuries. Her lungs had been punctured. One wound pierced her skull. On the front seat of her car lay a bloodied knife, believed to be the murder weapon, surrounded by smears that told only part of the story. This brutal attack stunned Olympia, but it wasn't an isolated event. Over the next few years, the quiet capital and surrounding Thurston County would become the backdrop for a series of killings and disappearances that shook the community and left investigators chasing shadows. This is Northern Crimes. Four years after Patricia Garrison's murder, another young life disappeared, this time without a sound. On May 25th, 1974, 14-year-old Brenda Joy Baker vanished while hitchhiking near Puyallup, Washington. It was a warm spring day, and Brenda had told friends she planned to meet a soldier stationed at Fort Lewis. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was common among teens, seen more as a rite of passage than a risk. Brenda was one of 7 children and had a history of running away, but this time felt different. She hadn't packed a bag or taken any money. When she didn't come home for the evening, her parents grew alarmed. They filed a missing person report before the day was over. For weeks, the silence deepened. Then, on June 17, 1974, 3 hikers wandering the edge of Miller-Sylvania State Park stumbled across something terrible. Near a clearing, partially hidden beneath 2 logs and a scattering of brush, lay the decomposing remains of a young girl. The scene was bleak. From the waist up, The body had nearly disintegrated. Time, heat, and the elements had erased her features. Only through dental records could authorities confirm it was Brenda. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for nearly a month, likely killed not long after she disappeared. The cause was listed as probable strangulation or knife wounds, but the advanced decomposition left little certainty. Her death, it turned out, wasn't the only one. Just months earlier, in November 1973, 14-year-old Catherine Devine had also vanished while hitchhiking, this time near Olympia. Her body was discovered in Capitol State Forest 11 days later. Her throat had been slashed, her clothing torn open, the remote woods a silent witness to another act of violence. 2 teenage girls, both hitchhiking alone, both found dead in wooded areas of Thurston County, both left behind barely a trace of their final hours. The similarities were chilling, and for investigators, it was no longer possible to view these cases in isolation. As detectives worked to piece together what had happened to Catherine Devine and Brenda Baker, unsettling connections began to surface. Both girls were young, just 14. Both were last seen hitchhiking near Olympia, and both were found murdered in remote forested areas of Thurston County, left exposed to the elements and the passing of time. The parallels were striking, and then came something far stranger. An anonymous caller phoned the Thurston County Sheriff's Department in the months following the murders. He claimed that in late November 1973, around the time Catherine Devine went missing, he'd been grouse hunting deep in the woods when he stumbled upon a shack. Inside, he saw a man with 2 girls, both around 12 to 14 years old. The caller said he sensed something was wrong, but left without intervening. When he later returned to the area in January, the shack had been abandoned. What remained, however, was grim. The carcasses of 6 dogs and 1 cat, skinned and stripped of their bones, littered the surrounding area. The bizarre scene raised questions about what had really taken place there. In early June 1974, the man claimed to have returned again and saw the same man near the shack. This time, when he returned with a friend on June 20, they were allegedly shot at. The timeline echoed the disappearances of Catherine and Brenda. While authorities couldn't verify all the details, the reports painted a disturbing picture: a remote hideout, repeated sightings, and potential threats to others who got too close. Additional witness reports added weight to the growing fear. A Seattle man named Bill Sullivan told investigators he'd seen a girl matching Brenda Baker's description hitchhiking near the Scott Lake interchange on I-5 in May 1974. He recalled her getting into an older, light-colored panel truck driven by a bearded man. The detail was chilling and specific. Despite these leads, investigators hit a familiar wall. Without hard evidence, no names, no vehicle plates, no physical proof, they couldn't identify a suspect. But the pattern was there: 2 girls gone, 2 bodies in the woods, eyewitnesses pointing to a danger lurking just beneath the surface, and it wasn't over. As the investigations into Catherine Devine and Brenda Baker's murders dragged on, another name began to cast a long and chilling shadow across the Pacific Northwest: Ted Bundy. By the mid-1970s, Bundy had become one of North America's most feared serial killers. His trail of terror stretched along multiple states, including Washington, where he admitted to killing at least 11 women. His victims were often young, white women with long brown hair parted down the middle, and his method was disturbingly calculated, luring them in with charm or fake injuries before attacking. The timeline of Bundy's known crimes overlapped with the murders in Thurston County. In May 1974, the month Brenda Baker vanished, Bundy was living in Seattle at the Rogers rooming house and working for the Department of Emergency Services in Olympia. That put him less than 2 hours away from both the place Brenda was last seen and the wooded park where her body was found. And the similarities didn't end there. Brenda and Catherine matched Bundy's victim profile, hitchhiking alone, found in forested areas, and killed within his active timeline. The pieces seemed to fit. For years, many believed Bundy was the prime suspect. Even Bill Devine, Catherine's father, came to believe it.
I needed to think it was somebody I could blame.
But behind the circumstantial similarities, doubts remained. Bundy had never confessed to either murder, and while he later claimed to have committed crimes too brutal to admit, no forensic evidence ever tied him to Brenda or Catherine. In the absence of clear answers, the myth of Bundy loomed large. His name became a convenient placeholder, a dark figure to attach to the unknown. But in time, the truth would take a much different shape. In 2001, with forensic DNA analysis now advanced enough to re-examine old evidence, investigators sent samples from the Catherine Devine case to the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory. The results were immediate and shocking. The DNA didn't match Ted Bundy. Instead, it pointed to William Cosden Jr., a man that had been in the case file from the very beginning. Cosden wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. In fact, he'd been an early suspect back in 1973. He worked at the Restover truck stop, a family business near where Catherine was last seen. Witnesses had reported seeing blood on his clothing and in his truck on the night Catherine disappeared. And just hours later, that same truck mysteriously caught fire and burned. Yet with no hard evidence, investigators couldn't make the case. The blood and hair samples collected in 1973 were inconclusive. Without a confession or stronger physical evidence, the case stalled. In 1986, deputies returned and collected updated samples of Cosden's blood, hair, and saliva. But it wasn't until 15 years later, using modern DNA technology, that those samples finally connected him to the crime scene. When confronted, Cosden initially denied knowing Catherine Devine. Later, he admitted to having sex with her, but insisted he hadn't killed her. On March 7, 2002, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office announced that DNA evidence had ruled out Ted Bundy and identified William Cosden Jr. as the man responsible for Catherine Devine's murder. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, nearly 30 years after the crime. For investigators, it was the moment they'd waited decades to see. For the Devine family, it was the beginning of long-delayed justice. On July 29, 2002, nearly 29 years after Catherine Devine's murder, a jury in Thurston County Superior Court delivered its verdict: guilty. William Cosden Jr. was convicted of first-degree murder. Judge Daniel Burschauer sentenced him to life in prison, calling him a danger to society who should never be released. For the Devine family, the moment brought both grief and relief. Nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions had finally led to justice.
For us, it's been 28 years of thoughts and thoughts and thoughts. It's finished. There's a justice system, and it works.
But while Catherine's killer was finally behind bars, the case of Brenda Joy Baker remained unresolved, and the similarities between the two murders raised an uncomfortable question: was Cosden responsible for both? Cosden's conviction offered long-awaited answers, but it also raised new and troubling questions. The similarities between Devine's case and that of Brenda Baker were hard to ignore. Both victims, teenage girls, both had last been seen hitchhiking alone, both were found dead in wooded areas of Thurston County, and both had connections to the Restover truck stop where Cosden had worked. It seemed more than a coincidence. Some investigators believe that Cosden, not Bundy, was responsible for Brenda's murder as well. The proximity of the crime scenes to Cosden's family businesses only deepened suspicions. But there was one problem: evidence. Brenda's body had been exposed to the elements for over a month before it was found. The advanced decomposition made it impossible to collect viable DNA. Unlike Catherine's case, there was no forensic trail, only circumstantial links and fading memories. Cosden was never charged in Brenda's case, and without new leads, her murder remains stuck in limbo, too cold to solve, too close to forget. Her parents never got answers. Her father died in 1979. Her mother passed away in 1989, just days before Ted Bundy was executed in Florida. Brenda's case became a symbol of how time and silence can erase even the strongest suspicions. In June 2024, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office launched a new cold case and missing persons unit. Led by Detective George Opplinger and Special Deputy Jim Lindsay, the two-person team is focused solely on solving the county's long-standing mysteries. The unit was made possible by a voter-approved public safety tax, giving investigators the resources to re-examine long-forgotten evidence. As of 2024, there are 30 active missing persons cases in Thurston County. 8 sets of unidentified remains found between 1981 and 2018 still await names. One of those cases is Patricia Garrison, murdered in 1970, her killer still unknown. But with new forensic tools, especially genetic genealogy, there's renewed hope that some answers may finally emerge. The murders that shook Olympia in the 1970s left more than grief in their wake. They reshaped a community. What had once felt like a quiet, safe corner of the Pacific Northwest was now a place where parents locked their doors earlier, where young women thought twice before hitchhiking, and where the woods, so familiar and serene, suddenly felt darker. For investigators, the memories remain vivid. Patricia Garrison's body beside her car, Catherine Devine in Capitol State Forest, Brenda Baker beneath a tangle of brush in Miller, Sylvania. William Cosden's conviction brought justice for one family, but it left others with questions that still haven't been answered. Was Cosden hiding more than one victim? What really happened to Brenda Joy Baker? And who stabbed Patricia Garrison on that cold January night? These cases stand as unresolved chapters, lives cut short, families left waiting, and communities left marked by unanswered questions. But they also reflect something else, the persistence of those who refuse to forget, the power of forensic science, and the belief that even in the darkest shadows, truth can still emerge. In Olympia and across the country, cold cases grow colder every year, but they're never truly forgotten, and sometimes, even decades later, justice has a way of catching up. There are places where stories vanish, into rivers, into forests, into silence. And in Washington state, that silence can be deafening. Beneath its towering evergreens and along its fog-swept coastlines, strange things happen. People disappear in broad daylight. Deaths are written off as accidents, even when the evidence says otherwise. And sometimes the truth is buried so deep, it slips into legend. In this episode, we're diving into 6 chilling cases from across the state, mysteries that defy easy answers. Some remain unsolved after decades, while others close too quickly. But all of them leave behind the same question. How can someone vanish or die and leave no explanation behind? These are the stories Washington still doesn't have answers for, and once you hear them, they're hard to forget. This is Northern Crimes. On September 16, 1987, 28-year-old Julie Weflin vanished without a trace from her workplace in Spokane, Washington. What began as a routine maintenance check at an electrical substation would become one of the Pacific Northwest's most enduring mysteries. Julie was one of the few female power equipment technicians working at the Bonneville Power Administration. At just 5 feet, 2 inches tall, and 110 pounds, she was known for her grit and professionalism in a field dominated by men. That September afternoon, she was called to check the nitrogen levels at the Spring Hill substation near Riverside State Park. She signed in around 2 p.m. based on the work order and equipment readings, investigators believe she finished the job by 3:30 p.m., but from that point on, Julie disappeared. It wasn't until nearly 9 p.m. that a neighbor noticed her truck sitting alone in the gravel lot. The scene was unsettling. The driver's side door and back hatch were both open. Her hard hat, toolbox, sunglasses, and water bottle were on the ground next to the vehicle. Her purse was still inside. Even more disturbing were the drag marks in the gravel, suggesting a struggle, as if Julie had tried to brace herself against the ground while being pulled away. Nearby, fresh tire tracks didn't match her truck, pointing to another vehicle at the scene. From the beginning, the evidence suggested a targeted abduction. Julie's husband, Mike, was quickly ruled out. He was painting a house 50 miles away that day. But he became the case's most dedicated advocate, organizing volunteer searches and keeping her story in the public eye for decades. One lead centered on a man who lived near the substation, a reclusive figure with reported ties to another missing woman, Deborah Jean Swanson, a teacher who disappeared from nearby Coeur d'Alene in 1986. He allegedly refused to cooperate with police and may have sent Mike a threatening letter months after the disappearance, though he was ultimately cleared as a suspect. Julie's former co-worker, amateur investigator John Polos, has long believed her case may be linked to a string of disappearances and murders in the Spokane area throughout the 1980s. The pattern is unsettling. Young women with similar builds vanishing without clear explanation. In 2020, a new witness stepped forward. He claimed to have seen Julie being abducted, but at the time believed he was watching a domestic argument. He told authorities the woman and man were calling each other by name, suggesting Julie may have known her attacker. Despite decades of investigation and a $25,000 reward, Julie Weflin's fate remains unknown. Her case underscores how danger can strike without any warning, even in daylight, even in familiar places. And the question that haunts her family and investigators to this day remains unanswered. What happened at that remote substation on September 16th, 1987? On September 8th, 1986, 18-year-old Kyra Cook woke up in excruciating pain, lying in the grass at R.A. Long Park in Longview, Washington. Her head throbbed, her ears rang, and then came the realization that shattered her sense of self. She had no idea who she was. She didn't know her name, where she was, or what day it was. What happened next became one of the rarest documented cases of amnesia in the world, a condition estimated to affect just 1 in 5 million people. Kyra wandered through the park in a daze. The first person she encountered was an elderly man reading a newspaper by his car. She asked for help. He agreed to drive her to the police station, but curiously, he dropped her off half a block away and drove off without checking to see if she made it inside. At 3:15 p.m., Deputy Joe Reese found Kyra standing outside the Cowlitz County Hall of Justice, looking frightened and confused. When he told her he was taking her to the hospital, her response stopped him cold.
I don't know what a hospital is.
At St. John's Hospital, doctors discovered a small lump on the back of Kyra's head, consistent with being struck or suffering a fall. That single injury had triggered a rare form of acute episodic amnesia. She couldn't remember her own name, her family, or even whether she'd graduated from high school. Investigators tried to piece together what happened during the missing hour. Kyra had left her house around 2:15 p.m. to mail a package to her German pen pal. By 3 p.m., she was found in the park. What happened in between remains unknown. When Kyra's photo appeared in the Longview Daily News, her mother, Gloria, immediately recognized her, but their reunion was heartbreaking. Kyra turned to the nurse and asked,
Are these supposed to be my parents?
The change was profound. Friends described the old Kyra as wild and rebellious. The young woman who returned home was quiet, formal, and distant. She no longer bit her nails. She refused to ride the bus. She stopped reading for pleasure. And most tragically, she lost her ability to taste or smell. 3 theories emerged. Police believed she may have been hit by a car. Her brown paper bag with makeup and spending money was missing. Others speculated mistaken identity, pointing to a similar-looking girl in the area who'd been assaulted multiple times by a stranger. The most enduring mystery is the man who drove her to the courthouse. Despite public pleas, he never came forward. Today, Kyra has reportedly regained most of her memories and built a new life, but that single hour and the self that disappeared with it remains a blank space she may never recover. On February 21st, 1997, a strange fax arrived at the offices of Coast to Coast AM, the late-night radio show known for exploring the paranormal. The sender identified himself as Mel Waters, a rural property owner from eastern Washington. His message was simple and extraordinary. Mel claimed he'd discovered a hole on his land that defied all explanation, a hole that appeared to be bottomless. That night, radio host Art Bell brought Mel on the air, and what followed would become one of the most talked about episodes in the show's history. The story captured imaginations across the country and sparked an enduring obsession with a mysterious location in the hills near Ellensburg, Washington. According to Mel, the hole was exactly 9 feet across, ringed by a 3-foot-high stone wall. Locals had used it as a dumping site for decades, yet it never filled. No matter what he dropped in, trash, appliances, animal remains, nothing ever made a sound, no impact, no echo. Determined to measure it, Mel began lowering fishing line with a weighted spool. He claimed he reached over 80,000 feet of line, more than 15 miles, without touching bottom. For comparison, the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point on Earth, is just under 36,000 feet deep, but the story didn't end there. Mel claimed animals avoided the hole. Birds wouldn't fly over it. He said he once lowered a package of Lifesavers candy to test for water, and they came back dry. Then came the story that cemented the legend. A neighbor, Mel said, had thrown his deceased hunting dog into the pit. Weeks later, the man claimed to see the same dog alive in the woods, wearing the same collar, but strangely altered. The dog didn't respond to its name and ran off when approached. The tale took a darker turn. Mel said government agents showed up, sealed off the land, and claimed a military training exercise was underway. When Mel protested that it was private property, he said he was threatened. According to him, officers offered him $250,000 per month to lease the land, and then sent him to Australia for undisclosed medical treatment. When Mel returned, he claimed the deal had collapsed. His ex-wife had violated the lease, his money was gone, and his property was now under government control. Despite the wild claims, no public records ever confirmed that anyone named Mel Waters lived in Kittitas County. Investigators and journalists have searched for the hole, but its exact location, if it exists, remains a mystery. Geologists are skeptical. Jack Powell, a state geologist, investigated the claims and found a likely origin: an old mine shaft roughly 90 feet deep on private land. He explained that a hole as deep as Mel described would be geologically impossible. It would collapse under the pressure of surrounding rock layers. Still, the legend refuses to fade. Mel's hole has inspired documentaries, podcasts, art exhibitions, and countless treasure hunters searching the hills of Washington state. Whether it was a hoax, a hallucination, or something stranger, Mel's story tapped into something deeper: our fear of the unknown and our fascination with what lies beneath. No proof has ever surfaced, but in the minds of many, the hole is still out there, waiting to be discovered. On January 4th, 2001, real estate agent Mike Emmert scheduled what should have been a routine appointment, a second showing of a $589,000 home in Woodinville, Washington. By 12:30 p.m., he would be dead, found brutally murdered in the bathtub, setting off one of the most perplexing cold cases in state history. Mike Emmert was living the dream, a top producing agent at Windermere Real Estate. He'd been named Realtor of the Year and twice listed among the Puget Sound's best. He and his wife, Mary Beth, were described as soulmates. They lived comfortably in Redmond, raising Mary Beth's daughter together. The day before the murder, Mike met a prospective buyer who introduced himself only as Stephen. They spoke in the food court of the Kirkland Park Place shopping mall. Stephen claimed he was relocating from Northern California and expressed interest in the Woodinville property, but several things about him were off. He'd bypassed Mike's office to set up the meeting directly. He insisted on meeting at a neutral public location, and he shared vague details, including a claim that he would soon come into money, possibly from an inheritance. Stephen was described as a man in his 50s with a limp, a cane, and what sounded like an East Coast accent. That night, when Mike told Mary Beth about the strange client, she had a bad feeling. The next morning, Mike noted Stephen in his planner, the 11:30 a.m. meeting. He even joked to a colleague that he was going to meet up with a, quote, weird dude. Once again, the two met in the mall parking lot before driving separately to the vacant home. At 12:30 p.m., the homeowner, Gail Garland, came home for lunch. She noticed the front door was ajar. Inside, she followed a trail of blood upstairs and found Mike's body in the bathtub, the shower still running. He'd been stabbed 19 times, possibly with a long blade hidden inside the cane. Investigators believe the attack began in the upstairs bedroom. Mike was struck from behind and then dragged across the carpet to the bathroom where the killer turned on the shower, likely to destroy forensic evidence. Mike's diamond wedding ring and expensive Breitling watch were missing. His Cadillac Escalade was later found abandoned at the same shopping mall where he'd met Stephen. Within 24 hours, his wallet turned up at Seattle's Coleman Dock, and someone used his cell phone to place a series of calls that led nowhere. For years, the case went cold. Then, in 2011, a decade later, a breakthrough came through DNA evidence. It pointed to Gary Kruger, a former Seattle police officer turned career criminal, but Kruger was already dead. His life story was chilling. A Vietnam veteran and former cop, Kruger was known for excessive force and eventually forced into retirement. After a failed career in real estate, he turned to bank robbery and was suspected of contract killings throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The link to Mike Emmert came through a bizarre 2010 home invasion. Kruger and an accomplice had attacked orthopedic surgeon Dr. Craig McAllister's family. The botched crime ended when both men drowned in Lake Washington trying to escape. When Kruger's DNA was entered into CODIS, it matched evidence found in Mike's Escalade. Investigators believe Kruger was working as a professional hitman, and someone had hired him to kill Mike Emmert. But who and why remains a mystery. No client was ever identified, no motive was ever uncovered, and to this day, no one knows why a respected real estate agent was marked for death. The case is still open, but the person who ordered the hit, the shadow behind the crime, has never been caught. On June 30th, 2015, 18-year-old Rosalita Rose Longy knocked on her grandmother's door in Wapato, Washington. It was 10 p.m. She was high again. Her grandmother, Verlyn, who'd raised her since infancy, followed her strict house rule. No one under the influence was allowed inside. I said, "Baby, you've got to go. If I'd known it was the last time I'd see her, I would have opened the door." Rose walked off into the warm summer night and was never seen again. Her story began with struggle. Born on February 4th, 1997, Rose had surgery at just 10 days old from a condition called stridor. which made breathing nearly impossible. Her grandmother flew from Montana to be at her side. From that moment on, Verlyn became her guardian, legally and emotionally. They lived together on the Yakima Reservation, where Rose grew into a bright, curious child. She loved babies, excelled in math and art, and dreamed of becoming a nurse or joining the army. But by age 16, things began to unravel. Rose fell in with the wrong crowd. She started using drugs, and the once promising student began drifting between treatment centers, friends' homes, and her boyfriend Isaiah's place. Still, she always came back to Verlyn, at least when she was sober. That final day followed a familiar pattern. Rose came by in the afternoon, clearly under the influence. Verlyn gently turned her away, reminding her of the rules. Hours later, she returned, softer, hesitant, and knocked. When Verlyn asked who it was, the answer came, Rose. But she was still high, and Verlyn, holding her boundary, didn't open the door. No one has seen her since. Rose became one of the dozens of Native women who've gone missing from the Yakima Reservation, which holds the highest number of missing persons of any tribal jurisdiction in Washington state. More than 30 indigenous women have vanished or been murdered there in recent years. Verlyn never stopped searching. She combed homeless camps, shelters, and treatment facilities. She heard dark rumors that Rose was beaten, stuffed in a trunk, buried alive in White Swan. She reports every lead to the tribal police and the FBI, but none have led to her granddaughter. The tragedy deepened in 2017. Rose's boyfriend, Isaiah Andrews, who some believe knew what happened, was shot and killed outside his home in Wapato. Verlyn believes he was silenced. Rose would be 28 years old now. Her younger sister, Michaela, still asks, "Grandma, when is my sister coming home?" Verlyn doesn't have an answer, but she's never stopped looking for the child she raised, the child she loved, the one who knocked on the door and disappeared. On October 12th, 2022, 31-year-old Hannah Rose Walker was found dead in a shallow creek near Trout Lake, Washington. She was naked, with abrasions and bruises covering her body. The last person to see her alive was a 67-year-old man named Jeremy G., who'd taken her to the creek for a swim. Hannah was an experienced swimmer. The water was calm and just 2 feet deep. Authorities ruled it an accidental drowning, but the circumstances surrounding Hannah's final hours tell a much different story, one marked by red flags, delays, and unanswered questions. Just days earlier, Hannah had been reeling from a domestic violence incident involving her ex-boyfriend Ricky. He'd been arrested in Portland after a heated altercation, but was released without charges when Hannah didn't follow up with the district attorney's office. 2 days later, she left town with Jeremy G., an older man she knew, and headed to his vacation cabin near Trout Lake. On October 12th, the pair arrived at the creek around 2:30 p.m. They laid out a sheet by the water, and Hannah went for a swim. According to Jeremy, the last time he saw her was around 3:30 or 4 p.m., swimming downstream. When she didn't return, he waited, and then finally called 911 at 6:48 p.m. When Deputy Tony Warren arrived, Jeremy led him to their setup, a towel, Hannah's phone, and the sheet still spread on the bank. Her swimsuit was found 75 yards away in the tall grass, and next to it, boot prints. Yet Hannah had been barefoot. No boots were ever recovered. And then they found her body, face down in the shallow creek, less than 50 feet wide, barely moving. It was clear something was wrong. An autopsy would later reveal DNA under Hannah's fingernails from an unidentified person. A sexual assault kit confirmed semen in her vaginal canal, yet investigators reportedly never collected DNA samples from any potential suspects, including Jeremy G. Worse still, Hannah's mother wasn't notified of her daughter's death until 3 days later, only after she called to request a welfare check. The autopsy wasn't conducted until 9 days after Hannah's death, despite protocols requiring it within 5 days unless delayed by court order. In January 2023, at the request of Sheriff Bob Songer, Jeremy G. was asked to take a polygraph. His response through his attorney was direct.
On the advice of counsel, I will not take a polygraph test at this time.
Despite these troubling details, the Klickitat County Sheriff's Office officially closed the case, ruling Hannah's death an accident. But to those who knew her, and anyone who looks closely, that ruling raises more questions than it answers. Hannah Rose Walker didn't just drown. She was found alone, violated, and abandoned in a shallow creek. And whoever was with her that day has never been held accountable. These stories span decades and landscapes, from remote forests to small towns to forgotten roadside edges. They share one thing in common: silence. In each case, something is missing: a name, a motive, a voice that was never heard. And across Washington state, these absences still echo in empty rooms, in unanswered phone calls, in the places where people simply vanished. Some of these mysteries may one day be solved, but others never will. Remembering them is the first step toward finding truth, or at the very least, refusing to let it disappear. The sound of gunfire pierces a quiet June night in Lake Stevens, Washington. Through the suburban streets, a black Pontiac moves with purpose, its driver gripping a .30 caliber revolver, searching for targets in the darkness. 6 teenage girls walk along the road, their laughter carrying through the warm air as they celebrate a birthday. But in an instant, their world erupts into violence. A muzzle flash, a single shot, and a 15-year-old girl crumples to the pavement as her friend's screams echo into the night. But this was just the beginning. As police rushed to the scene, more shots rang out across the city. Someone was hunting in Lake Stevens that night, transforming this peaceful suburb into a killing ground. This is the true story of the Lake Stevens murder, a crime that shattered a family, unleashed terror across 2 cities, and revealed a killer hiding in plain sight. This is Northern Crimes. Lake Stevens sits 40 miles north of Seattle, where suburban comfort meets small-town charm. The community wraps around its namesake lake, its neighborhoods filled with well-kept homes and manicured lawns. In 2013, it embodied the American suburban dream, a place where parents felt safe letting their teenagers walk to the corner store, where violent crime was something that happened in news reports from bigger cities. But beneath this idyllic facade, warning signs had begun to emerge. Random shots fired in the night, bullets through windows, reports of a dark vehicle prowling quiet streets. These incidents barely registered in local news, mere footnotes in police reports. No one connected these dots. No one recognized them as harbingers of the violence to come. In a community built on the promise of safety, no one wanted to believe that a predator was learning their patterns, studying their habits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They called her 4.0. Mary Claire Conley, known to her friends and family as Molly, earned that nickname through dedication and brilliance. She was a straight-A student at Seattle's prestigious Bishop Blanchett High School, a varsity lacrosse player, and devoted her free time at the local food bank. But those who were closest to her saw beyond those perfect grades. They saw a 15-year-old whose favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird, mirrored her own sense of justice and compassion. Her warmth left an indelible mark on everyone she met. Her teachers remembered a student who never left struggling classmates behind. Her lacrosse teammates recalled her ability to rally the team, even after the most crushing defeats. To her friends, she was their cornerstone, the one who made everyone feel like they belonged. June 1st, 2013 was Molly's birthday. 6 girls, sleeping bags, snacks from the corner store, all the ingredients for a perfect teenage celebration. But as the night descended over Lake Stevens, Molly's optimistic future would collide with pure evil. 11:15 p.m. marked the moment when the community lost its innocence. The 6 friends walked shoulder to shoulder down the suburban street, their phones illuminating their faces as they shared photos from their celebration. The black Pontiac materialized like a phantom, its headlights piercing the gloom. The engine slowed. A muzzle flash lit up the night. A single shot changed everything. The 911 calls that followed captured pure horror in real time. 5 terrified voices flooded emergency dispatch, their words barely coherent through sobs and screams. As first responders raced toward the scene, dispatchers tried to calm the traumatized teenagers while extracting crucial details about the gunman's vehicle. But through the chaos of those calls, something made the operator's blood run cold. The distinct sound of more gunshots echoing in the distance. The attacker wasn't finished. In fact, authorities would soon discover this was just the opening act in a night of methodical violence that would stretch across 2 cities. As police converged on the crime scene, the black Pontiac was already hunting its next target, leaving a trail of shell casings and shattered glass that would eventually lead to a killer hiding in plain sight. As police raced to Molly's location, emergency channels erupted with reports. A bullet through a living room window, another through a child's bedroom. Nearly a dozen drive-by attacks in a matter of hours, stretching from Lake Stevens to Marysville. The gunman targeted homes where TVs flickered and lights burned, signs of life he seemed determined to extinguish. In one residence, a bullet missed a sleeping 15-year-old by inches. In another, 2 young children dove for cover as glass exploded just above their heads.
I believe somebody just drove by my house and possibly shot through my living room window.
Between assaults, witnesses glimpsed the black Pontiac, now bearing damage from hitting another vehicle, a mistake that would ultimately lead to the attacker's downfall. The night unfolded with cruel irony for the Conley family. While terror gripped the streets, Molly's father sat in his living room, waiting to pick up his eldest daughter from her senior prom. He was unaware of the tragedy unfolding just blocks away. This contrast was devastating. One daughter celebrating a milestone of youth, while another's life was being violently cut short. As dawn approached, detectives began piecing together a pattern that suggested these weren't random acts of violence, but rather the methodical moves of someone who knew the area intimately. But tracking down the assailant would prove to be one of the most challenging manhunts in Snohomish County history. For 27 long, harrowing days, the suburb held its breath. Parents kept their children indoors, streets emptied at sunset. While residents retreated behind locked doors, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Major Crimes Unit worked tirelessly, assembling a puzzle of ballistics, paint chips, and broken headlight fragments. A $5,000 reward raised by the local American Legion and Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound brought tips flooding in, but the perpetrator remained elusive. Then, detectives noticed something distinctive about the ammunition. .30 carbine caliber, rare for handguns. Records from the Cabela's sporting goods store in Tulalip revealed a recent purchase, a Ruger Blackhawk revolver bought by a Boeing mechanic named Eric Walker. As authorities dug deeper, a disturbing profile emerged. 27 years old, no criminal record, living an unremarkable life in Marysville. But ordinary men don't prowl neighborhoods with loaded weapons. The investigation exposed an unsettling truth about violence in suburban America. Predators often wear masks of normalcy. Walker's coworkers described him as quiet but friendly. His neighbors knew him as the guy who maintained an immaculate lawn, and his social media painted a picture of an average life. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed veneer, investigators would soon uncover evidence of a methodical killer who'd been hiding in plain sight all along. On June 28, 2013, the veneer of ordinary life crumbled. Police arrested Eric Walker as he left his Marysville home, heading to another routine day at Boeing. Inside his house, detectives uncovered the arsenal of his attacks: 2 Ruger Blackhawk revolvers, an M1 carbine rifle, and ammunition matching the type used in the shootings. The evidence mounted like pieces of a sinister puzzle. Paint chips from his black Pontiac G6 matched those found at the crime scene. A broken headlight piece from his father's garage fit perfectly with fragments left behind during the rampage. When questioned, Walker's story shifted 4 times until he finally acknowledged seeing the group of girls that night. But why? The question of motive loomed over the investigation like a shadow. Each clue revealed a meticulous mind at work. Walker had systematically cleaned his weapons after each attack, stored the ammunition in organized containers, and maintained detailed records of his gun purchases. This wasn't the chaos of a madman, but rather the precise actions of someone who planned methodically. Most disturbing of all was Walker's behavior in the aftermath. He maintained his daily routine following the shootings, attending work meetings, socializing with friends, and even discussing the case with colleagues. These same coworkers had no idea they were sharing theories about the crime with their architect, the very man who'd orchestrated the night of terror. The trial began in early 2015. The courtroom fell silent as the 911 tapes played, filling the chamber with the raw anguish of that June night.
911, what's your emergency, please?
Walker's Boeing coworkers recounted his unsettling behavior in the weeks following the attack. His obsessive monitoring of news coverage, his probing questions about the investigation's progress, his detached curiosity about the potential consequences for Molly's killer. But justice proved elusive. Despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence, the jury deadlocked on the first-degree murder charge, 11 to convict, 1 to acquit. After 9 hours of deliberation, they reached a compromise, guilty of first-degree manslaughter rather than murder. Walker was also convicted of 4 counts of first-degree assault and 5 counts of drive-by shooting. The verdict stunned the community. For many, the manslaughter conviction felt like a second tragedy, a legal technicality that failed to capture the premeditated nature of the crime.
The jury has concluded the accused pulled the trigger and killed Molly. They have concluded there was no intent to hurt her. However, soon after, they have concluded that he shot at Holmes and intended to do great bodily harm. We're confused with this.
As one juror later revealed, the lone holdout had fixated on a single detail about lighting conditions that night, allowing reasonable doubt to overshadow the mountain of evidence pointing to premeditated murder. The case would become a sobering reminder of how the pursuit of perfect justice can sometimes prevent justice from being served at all. At the sentencing, Judge Thomas Wynn showed no mercy. He imposed the maximum penalty, 91 years. His assessment of Walker was blistering, condemning him as someone who'd systematically terrorized an entire community. Throughout the proceedings, Walker remained impassive, responding with mechanical brevity when addressed, uttering only a single word when asked if he wished to speak. The severity of the sentence reflected not just Molly's death, but the methodical nature of Walker's rampage. The judge emphasized how the defendant had deliberately targeted homes where families felt safest, continuing his attacks even after taking an innocent life. Walker's stoic demeanor throughout the proceedings only reinforced the portrait of a man devoid of remorse, explanation, or basic human empathy. The judge's final declaration would resonate through the courthouse.
Anyone who seeks to instill fear in the community should be considered a terrorist. You committed these crimes to enhance your own sense of empowerment. That is, to make yourself feel important.
Today, Eric Walker serves his sentence in prison, guaranteed to spend at least 69 years behind bars, even with good behavior. For the Conley family, no punishment could fill the void left by Molly's death. Their loss remains immeasurable, a permanent reminder of a future stolen in one senseless moment. Yet, in Lake Stevens, Molly's spirit persists. Her influence lives on in the students who study in the library bearing her name, in the annual scholarship honoring her memory, and in the countless lives she touched during her brief 15 years. Her family's wish remains simple. Remember Molly not as a victim, but as the bright, compassionate soul who approached each day with purpose and joy. The Lake Stevens murder continues to resonate throughout the community, serving as a stark reminder that violence recognizes no boundaries, that evil can hide behind the most unassuming facades. Yet perhaps the most chilling truth is simpler. In any peaceful town, in any ordinary moment, a single act of violence can forever shatter the boundary between innocence and tragedy. Washington State, with its stunning landscapes and bustling cities, hides a darker side. Beneath the serene exterior, some of the most baffling unsolved crimes have left communities in fear and families desperate for answers. In the cities and remote areas alike, these chilling cases cast long shadows, reminding us that danger can lurk anywhere. So join us as we explore three of Washington's most mysterious and haunting unsolved cases. Each story is filled with unanswered questions, setting the stage for a journey into the unknown, where the line between safety and peril is disturbingly thin. This is Northern Crimes. In the heart of Washington State lies the quiet, remote community of Mineral. Tucked in between dense forests and rugged terrain, this seemingly tranquil area became the backdrop for one of the most chilling and unsolved murder cases of the 1980s. The media would come to call it the, quote, tube sock killings, a name that evokes both curiosity and fear. But for the families of the victims, it represents an enduring nightmare. In the summer of 1985, what began as a simple camping trip for a young couple soon turned into a harrowing tale of mystery and terror. This is the story of the tragic events that left the community of Mineral in shock and the search for answers that, to this day, remain elusive. On August 10, 1985, Stephen Harkins, 27, and his girlfriend, Ruth Cooper, 42, left their Tacoma home for a peaceful weekend camping trip at Toole Lake in Pierce County. The couple was known for their love of the outdoors, but this trip would tragically be their last. When the couple failed to return to their jobs at a Tacoma vocational school on Monday, their families grew concerned and reported them missing. 4 days later, on August 14th, hikers passing through the remote campsite made a grim discovery. Stephen Harkins' lifeless body lay in a sleeping bag, a bullet wound to his head, suggesting he'd been shot while asleep. Nearby, the couple's pet dog was also found deceased. At the time, law enforcement suspected a connection to the March 1985 murders of Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Levine, another couple from Kent, Washington, but the investigation soon took a darker turn. On October 26, a skull was found near Harts Lake, just 1.5 miles from where Harkins' body had been discovered. Dental records confirmed it was Ruth Cooper. 2 days later, her body and purse were found 50 feet from the skull. A tube sock was eerily tied around her neck, and an autopsy revealed she had died of homicidal violence. Tragically, the story doesn't end there. Over a month after Ruth Cooper's body was found, another couple from Tacoma, Mike Reamer, 36, and Diana Robertson, 21, along with their 2-year-old daughter Crystal, embarked on a trip to find a Christmas tree on December 12, 1985. That evening, customers at a Kmart store in Spanaway, 30 miles north, found young Crystal standing alone outside the door. Unable to provide coherent information about her parents' whereabouts, the police were called in to investigate. 2 months later, on February 18, 1986, Diana Robertson's body was discovered near a logging road off Washington State Route 7, south of Elby. She'd suffered from multiple wounds, and similarly to Ruth Cooper, had a tube sock tied around her neck. Mike Reamer's pickup truck was found nearby, with a blood-stained note on the dashboard that read, "I love you, Diana." This note was identified by Diana's mother as being in Mike's handwriting. With Mike Reamer missing, investigators initially suspected him of Diana's murder, but a lack of motive and the possibility that he too was a victim of the same killer left the case wide open. And in fact, Reamer had been charged with domestic assault against Diana just months prior, but they'd reconciled by December. Years and years passed, and in March 2011, a new development emerged when hikers found a partial human skull in the area where Diana's body was discovered. Dental records confirmed it belonged to Mike Reamer. Although the cause of death remains undetermined, authorities did rule out a gunshot wound. To this day, the tube sock killings remain one of Washington State's most perplexing cold cases. Despite years of investigation and public appeals, the murderer or murderers responsible for these heinous acts have never been brought to justice. The families of Stephen Harkins, Ruth Cooper, Mike Reamer, and Diana Robertson continue to seek closure, haunted by the unanswered questions and the loss of their loved ones. In the town of Redmond, Washington, a tragic mystery has haunted the community for over a decade. A vibrant young software engineer was brutally murdered in her apartment. Despite law enforcement's efforts and extensive investigations, the killer remains free. This is the story of Arpana Jinaga, a case cloaked in darkness and unanswered questions. Arpana Janaga was an exceptional young woman. Born in Hyderabad, India, she pursued her dreams with relentless tenacity. After mastering her studies, Arpana moved to the United States to advance her career in computer engineering. She settled in Redmond, where she thrived as a software engineer at a local Bellevue company. Those who knew Arpana characterized her as intelligent, sociable, and vivacious. She had a charismatic personality that attracted people, forging friendships easily in her new home. Arpana was outgoing and friendly, joining a motorcycle club, practicing taekwondo, and volunteering at an animal shelter and fire department, all within 8 months of moving to Redmond. On Halloween night in 2008, Arpana, like many others in her apartment complex, was eager to celebrate. The complex was filled with festive spirit, and a lively party was underway. Arpana, dressed in a costume, joined her neighbors and friends for a night of fun. Witnesses remember seeing Arpana having a great time at the party, mingling with guests and even participating in a Halloween costume contest. But as the night unfolded, she eventually returned to her apartment, unaware it would be her last time seen alive. The next morning, Arpana's unresponsiveness to calls and messages stirred concern. A worried neighbor, along with a friend of Arpana's father, decided to check on her, only to discover a horrifying scene. Arpana's apartment showed signs of a violent struggle, and her lifeless body bore the marks of a brutal attack. The killer had attempted to clean up the scene by using bleach, toilet bowl cleaner, and motor oil to destroy DNA evidence. Her bed had been stripped, a blanket was partially burned, and her soaked comforter was found in the bathtub. The Redmond police initiated an intensive investigation, identifying several suspects who'd attended the party or known Arpana. DNA found at the crime scene was linked to 3 men, but only one, Emmanuel Fair, was charged with murder. Fair's DNA was found on Janaga's neck, a piece of duct tape used to gag her, and a piece of toilet paper found at the crime scene was mixed with Janaga's blood on a robe found in the apartment building's trash bin. The neighbor's DNA was found on a discarded bottle of motor oil found in the same bag with the robe, and a third man's DNA was on a bootlace, also found in the trash, but he had an alibi. Despite the DNA evidence collected, the case was marked with complexities. Multiple DNA profiles made it challenging to identify the killer. Additionally, the neighbor, a suspect, invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, limiting the scope of questions he could be asked during the trial. In the ensuing years, Emmanuel Fair faced 2 trials for the murder. The first, in 2017, resulted in a deadlocked jury and a mistrial. The second trial in 2019, Fair was found not guilty. A juror from the second trial revealed that the jury was evenly split at the start, but eventually concluded that the state had not met its burden of proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt. They found Fair not guilty because of reasonable doubt, not because they believed he was completely innocent. Years have passed, but Arpana's murder remains a raw wound for her family and friends. They continue to seek justice in hopes that the truth will one day come to light. This case has caught the attention of true crime enthusiasts and investigators, all trying to solve the puzzle that remains unsolved. Who killed Arpana Janaga? Was it someone she knew, or a random act of violence? Or is the truth buried between the layers of evidence, waiting to be unearthed? The questions persist, and the mystery endures. In the peaceful town of Tumwater, Washington, The pace of life was steady and predictable. However, in May 2016, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day shook this small community. This is the story of Logan Schindelman, a bright and kind-hearted young man who disappeared without a trace. At the time of his disappearance, Logan was only 19 years old. Raised by his devoted grandmother, Logan was recognized for his intelligence and gentle spirit. He'd recently graduated from Tumwater High School, where he was a star defensive back on the school's football team, and briefly attended Washington State University. But despite his promising future, Logan seemed burdened in the days leading up to his disappearance. On the morning of May 19, 2016, Logan was last seen by his grandmother at their home. He appeared distracted and preoccupied with thoughts he didn't share at the time. That morning, he left the house and no one saw him again. Later that day, Logan's car, a black 1996 Chrysler Sebring, was found deserted on the shoulder of Interstate 5 near mile marker 92. His wallet, phone, and driver's license were left in the car, but Logan was nowhere to be found. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle or foul play, exacerbating the mystery of his disappearance. Inside his wallet were his debit card, driver's license, and $25 in cash. Search parties were promptly organized with family, friends, and law enforcement searching the area for any clues. Despite the use of search dogs and local community support, their efforts failed to locate Logan. Several drivers reported seeing a young man fitting Logan's description walking along the interstate. One witness saw a man resembling Logan standing outside the parked car on Interstate 5, accompanied by two white men. Another witness reported seeing Logan's vehicle swerving across lanes and crashing into the center median around 2 p.m., with a man exiting the passenger side and running into the woods. These conflicting reports added further confusion to an already baffling case. A search with cadaver and tracking dogs in those woods lasted 6 hours, but yielded no results. As days turned into weeks, Logan's family remained hopeful. They made public appeals for information, sharing Logan's story on social media and with news outlets. The case even gained national attention, being profiled on the investigation discovery series Disappeared in 2018 and on Dateline NBC's podcast Missing in America in 2023, but no significant leads were found. Speculation about Logan's disappearance has been widespread. Some believed he had voluntarily disappeared, possibly due to mental health issues or a personal crisis. Others feared he'd been abducted or was a victim of foul play. Theories abounded, but none brought the answers Logan's family desperately needed. The emotional toll on Logan's family and community has been severe. Despite the pain, the hope for uncovering the truth remains. The case is still open, with law enforcement reviewing any new tips. Logan Schindelman's disappearance serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly a life can become a mystery. His story leaves us with more questions than answers, a young man lost in the shadows of uncertainty. Washington State, a blend of natural beauty and urban life, is overshadowed by lingering mysteries. Each case we've examined highlights the thin line between tranquility and danger. The ongoing quest for answers and justice underscores the unseen darkness lurking in even the most serene places. So, thanks for joining us as we probe these mysteries, and stay tuned for more intriguing stories on Northern Crimes.